Ой, буцатера. Я твой все.
Ось. Ось він.
Yours is done. There he is, Nikita, right outside your house.
Міст підірвали. Міст підірвали. Безпілотник летить. Ось він близько.
The drone's coming. It's getting close. You see it? Emergency epic cotton in Russia. Urgent statement from Ukraine's Commander-in-Chief Valery Zaluzhnyi. We discuss current battlefield events with military expert Roman Svitan. Roman, hello, and thank you. Friends, please like to share Roman Svitan's analysis. Also interested in your opinion on the topics that are being discussed now, right where you are watching us from, your cities, countries. Roman, let's start with the good news. The day before, UAVs attacked the Russian cities of Sochi and Adler. This is the Krasnodar region, the territory of Provisional Russia. The strike hit an oil depot supplying fuel to Sochi International Airport. Roman, such strikes haven't been seen for a long time. What can you share publicly about the attack? What UAVs were used and what consequences for Russia are known? This is not an oil depot, but a fuel and lubricants warehouse where aviation kerosene is stored. It is an expendable warehouse serving, among other things, the Sochi airfield. The airfield is used by the Russian military. Kerosene from this base is also supplied to other consumers, including Mozdok, In case of an emergency, military airfields would also be powered from this fuel and lubricant depot. This is a legitimate military objective for us. One of the main tasks is to ensure security against Russian air defenses by destroying aviation kerosene, i.e., fuel for airplanes. Strikes must be carried out on oil refineries. Aviation kerosene is produced in Russia at only a dozen such refineries. It is necessary to destroy fuel and lubricant depots where aviation kerosene is stored in large volumes. The attack was carried out competently by a combined method using drones. First, our drones penetrated the territory of Crimea and neutralized the Russian radio technical control systems, the locators of the radio technical troops. The strikes were made on Syrskyi and Kacha. The approach was made from the sea, the optimal route. Russian troops raised helicopters in an attempt to intercept, but the air defenses were neutralized at the time of passage of the main drones, which also came in from the sea and headed for Sochi, the military base. The base is located on the federal territory of Syria in the Adlerovsky district of Sochi. The route was chosen correctly. A properly organized attack allowed the Lyuty and An-196 drones to accomplish their combat mission. The drones were probably upgraded in terms of combat capability, as they were able to burn through the aramid and Kevlar nets with which the Russians have wrapped most of their oil and gas facilities over the past 6 months. One of the impact mechanisms was the use of appropriate munitions. Roman, the day before, an An-24 passenger plane crashed in Russia. There were about 50 people on board. Although this is not directly related to military action, sanctions against Russia, particularly in the aviation sector, are clearly in place and have real consequences. An-24 was on a planned route but disappeared during the second approach. Roman, from an aviation perspective, what might have caused the accident and its consequences? Do you agree that sanctions on Russia, especially in aviation, affect the fleet's condition and flight safety? These are more like sanctions from the Heavenly Office. Curses from millions of Ukrainians fall on the heads of Russians every day. The Heavenly Office, receiving these curses, then solves issues involving, among others, Ukrainian airplanes. The An-24 is an Antonov-designed, Ukrainian-made airplane. The plane, under the influence of the Heavenly Office and the curses heaped on the Russians, accomplished the combat mission. The An-24 is a reliable Ukrainian-made airplane. It is difficult to disable. Probably the influence was from above. In terms of reliability, it is one of the best examples of former Soviet aircraft, also used in civilian aircraft construction. Also Roman, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has officially reported successful strikes on enemy equipment in Belgorod region, a territory temporarily occupied by Russia. Our troops hit a Nebo-M radar system and a Russian S-300P anti-aircraft missile system. Roman, what do you know about this? Please explain in simple words what the S-300P is, what exactly the Nebo-M was hit with, why this equipment is important to the Russians, and how much its destruction could complicate their presence on the battlefield. After the Lyuty drones began moving toward Moscow in large numbers, the main direction was east and north, through the Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod regions. The Russians have pulled a significant number of air defense assets to the line of contact. The Russians have engaged various levels of systems, including the older S-300s, deploying them in front of the S-400 positions. These complexes, with a range of 70 to 150 kilometers, hold direction and are used against heavy drones. Due to the increased density of air defense assets, they had to move closer to the air contact line, coming under Ukrainian strikes. Operational tactical level drones defeat enemy surface-to-air missile systems. HIMARS multiple rocket launchers with M30 and M31 missiles are effective at a range of up to 80 kilometers. Aviation is also actively engaged. The American anti-radar missile, used for the fourth year, has destroyed dozens of anti-aircraft missile systems and enemy locators, as it is aimed at the source of radio signal. An integrated approach to neutralization of air defenses is yielding results. The density of air defense assets has been increased to the border of the Caucasus Sea. Leave your thoughts, emotions, and impressions below the video. Support Roman Svitan's analytics with a like. It will help spread the video to more viewers. Write where you are watching us from, your cities and countries. Roman, let's discuss Oleksandr Syrskyi's statement that Ukrainian troops could launch offensives if military aid increases significantly. Please comment cautiously, as too much info on this topic could have negative effects. How would you assess the Commander-in-Chief's words? What does he mean simply, how ready are we for a counteroffensive with proper military support, and how appropriate is it to discuss human resources here? Based on the available forces and means of the ground forces, it is inexpedient to conduct offensive operations at the operational level. Only ground operations at the tactical level are possible. Counterattacks on individual positions, concentration on previously lost areas, or creating pressure on the enemy in another area of the front in order to divert attention from the main direction. It is possible to carry out counter-offensive operations in the Bryansk and Belgorod regions by analogy with last year's actions in the Kursk direction. The goal is to divert 100,000 Russian reserves of the second wave from the main pressure on the eastern sections of the Zaporizhzhia front. From this point of view, several operations can be realized. This is not an operational tactical level, but exclusively tactical. There are not enough forces and means to conduct operations at the operational level, especially in the sections of the Eastern and Zaporizhzhia fronts. There is a drawdown due to the lack of personnel and means of defeat, which is realized by all participants in the process. Personnel formation is possible only if armor is removed from security forces and territorial centers focus on public sector resources, mainly security. Hundreds of thousands of qualified, motivated fighters are now doing the wrong tasks, but could be deployed against external aggression. The launch of this mechanism may allow to stop the advance of Russian troops on the Eastern and Zaporizhzhia fronts and conduct several counteroffensive operations of tactical level, no more than that. At present, it is possible to conduct operations at the operational, tactical, and strategic levels using air and missile defeat means. Such operations are already underway. Strategic-level long-range drones select strategic targets to hit. Their concentration in one direction can be the beginning of an offensive or counteroffensive operation on an operational, tactical, and strategic scale. The addition of air and missile components produced independently or obtained from partners makes it possible to conduct strategic-level operations, such as Crimea, and achieve positive results without ground action. Destroying Russian military facilities in Crimea could take about 6 months if sufficient missiles and aircraft are available. Russian military facilities in Crimea are stationary, about 150 old Soviet structures known publicly. They can be targeted after destroying enemy air defenses and repelling Russian aviation. Drones are active and efforts continue to acquire long-range missiles like the AEM-Shin-20D, with a range up to 150 kilometers to intercept Russian aircraft. The presence of at least a couple of Patriot installations will make it possible to push back Russian aviation, at least from the left bank or the land corridor. This will create a serious impact on the actions of the Russian Air Force. Such an operation could be considered a strategic counteroffensive. The former commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Valery Zaluzhnyi, who is now Ukraine's ambassador to the UK, said in an interview with journalists of the LBUA News and Analysis website that the war had entered the exhaustion phase and could last for years. Roman, how do you assess this statement? Do you agree that the war has really acquired the signs of a protracted conflict? To what extent is Ukraine ready for a prolonged confrontation with Russia if it has international support, resources, and maintains internal stability? There are two options for achieving victory. The first is economic pressure on the Russian Federation. To do this, it is necessary to relaunch the sanctions mechanisms initiated by Vasily Malyuk and Kirill Budanov, aimed at destroying the Russian hydrocarbon industry. Stopping the flow of petrodollars into the Russian treasury for 3 to 4 years will lead to its economic collapse. In order to achieve the goal, serious sanctions are needed to completely destroy the Russian hydrocarbon industry. Production structures, distillation facilities, oil transshipment facilities, and the shadow fleet of the Russian Federation that organizes transportation should be eliminated. The list of targets includes refineries, storage facilities, and oil depots. This is a comprehensive approach. The task can be accomplished in 6 months if it is assigned to all services: special services, the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the Foreign Intelligence Service. With the involvement of all law enforcement agencies, the task becomes feasible. Within 3 to 4 years, Russia will have to look for a way out of the situation, but it is unlikely that it will be able to do so. If the Soviet Union could not cope with the economic crisis, Russia will not be able to do so. Most of the republics and state entities captured by the Russian Empire are subsidized from Moscow. In case of termination of financing of state expenditures of these regions, they will go out of control and start independent movement. The collapse of the Russian Empire will lead to crisis and defeat of the Russian army on the territory of Ukraine. This mechanism is not quick. Its realization will take at least 3 to 4 years. Without active economic pressure on Russia, the situation will not change. The existing sanctions promoted by partners are not capable of causing a collapse. Only sanctions initiated by Vasily Malyuk and Kirill Budanov and the direct destruction of the Russian hydrocarbon industry will be effective. Oil, gas processing, and refined products ignite and explode, especially in the presence of nitrate. Various products containing ammonia can also contribute to the destruction of the Russian economy within 3 to 4 years. Otherwise, the war will drag on for a long time. The issue of aid from Europe and the US remains relevant. With support from their side, the war will also last 3 to 4 years until the territorial integrity of Ukraine is restored. However, the struggle will not end until the collapse of the Russian Empire. The empire wages wars constantly, exists at their expense. There is no other way but economic pressure on the Russian economy and military sphere. Roman, let's talk about the long-term game between Russia and NATO, because the former commander-in-chief in the same interview called it a fatal mistake of the alliance that NATO is not ready for the next war. You and I have discussed repeatedly that Russia probably won't stop at Ukraine alone, and we talk all the time about possible hybrid aggression. Zaluzhnyi emphasized that NATO is not ready for a new war because it is only rearming but not changing military doctrines. What do you think Zaluzhnyi meant, and is the alliance really not ready for a war with Russia? NATO and its member states are not ready for positional trench warfare. They got out of it in the last millennium. They do not need trench warfare and will not bring hostilities to this format. Ukraine continues the confrontation with Russia in the frontal zone, in the near-frontal or transfrontal area, without being able to get out of the trench phase. However, modern warfare must be conducted by means of remote defeat, for which NATO is fully prepared. If a real threat or concrete actions against NATO countries, not provocations but a threat, arise from the Russian Federation, a few hundred, maximum 1,000 warheads of Tomahawk-type cruise missiles will be enough to launch a conventional strike against Moscow. If such a scenario is realized, Moscow will be destroyed, and the remaining republics of Russia will be forgotten. A strike on Moscow using Tomahawk-type cruise missiles could result in the rapid disintegration of the Russian Federation into dozens of republics and state entities, which would eventually formalize as independent states. At present, Moscow holds them together thanks to financial dependence, the so-called petrodollar needle. A direct Tomahawk strike on the capital is capable of changing the course of any frontal or positional war against NATO structures. Valery Zaluzhnyi may refer to trench warfare, which NATO is not preparing for. Modern wars rely on long-range weapons like missiles and aircraft. For example, in the Israel-Iran conflict, a unilateral strike was followed by a ballistic attack, stabilizing quickly. If missile numbers reached 1,500, the state could collapse. A similar threat exists if Moscow faced thousands of Tomahawk cruise missiles. This is how such issues are handled. Countries with significant military capabilities will not engage in trench warfare. They act through secondary or third-party actors, such as Russia, which, for example, China uses as an instrument of aggression. The leading powers themselves will not engage in open conflict among themselves. In case of escalation, they will neutralize the threat instantly. Roman, lastly, what is happening on the battlefield now? There are constant reports of sabotage and reconnaissance groups near Pokrovsk. We also discussed a possible intensified offensive this summer. What's happening on the front, the hottest areas, and how would you assess the current front's architecture? In recent weeks, the front line has continued to move, with Ukrainian positions gradually being lost. The rate of advance of the Russian forces is not high, about 100 to 200 meters per day, but there is a steady dynamic despite significant losses on their part. Several active locations have been identified. Activity is decreasing in a number of directions, and Russian troops will probably not send a second wave to these areas. The pressure is decreasing, but persists. The main locations are controlled by Russian forces, the Orekhovo area, advancing from Vasilkivka to Kamenskoye and on to Orekhovo, the Polohi and Gulyai-Polye areas, where attempts to advance continue. In the area of Bogatyr and Pokrovsk, the Russians are trying to bypass Pokrovsk and cut the main supply line from Dobropilya. A serious environmental and humanitarian disaster has been recorded in Donbas, the disappearance of the water supply. Pipes laid by Russia from Donbas mainly serve metallurgical plants. No water reaches civilians. This is an act of genocide against Ukrainians in the region. Moscow aims to displace or destroy Ukrainians there. To ensure water supply, the Syrskyi Donetsk-Donbass pipeline must be launched. Russia is redistributing the efforts of the second wave towards Slavyansk, Kramatorsk and Druzhkivka in order to approach the agglomeration of these three cities. A water pipeline begins in this area, passing through several water-lifting mechanisms that have already been destroyed in the fighting. The conduit runs from Slavyansk to Chasov Yar, then to Toretsk, then to Gorlovka and Donetsk, reaching the Verkhnokalmovskoye reservoir. Russia will focus its efforts on capturing Toretsk, Chasov Yar, and the Slavyansk area in order to restore the water pipeline and ensure water supply to Donbas. Over the next month and a half, pressure on Slavyansk is expected to increase, including from the north through the Kupiansko-Limanskaya and Torsko-Limanskaya axes, from the east through an attempted advance from Siversk, and from the south through Konstantinovka. Pressure will increase on Chasov Yar and Toretsk from the southwest, between Pokrovsk and Konstantinovka. Fighting intensifies along the Slavyansk direction. The main cause is the total lack of water in Donbas due to dried-up Kazhankovsk, Donetsk, and Verkhnokalmios reservoirs. Roman, thank you for your analysis and position. Roman Svitan is a flight instructor, colonel in the reserve. The Ukrainian army answers key questions on a daily basis. Vladyslav Solovyov was with you. Friends, support the video with a like, write your thoughts on the topics discussed. Strikes on Russian territory, statements by Valery Zaluzhnyi and Oleksandr Syrskyi. Indicate from where you watched us. Don't forget to subscribe. See you on the air on 24.